Hello, my name is Robin Da Vinci, and today we are going to tackle some fun subjects about money. And with me today is Marry Oniel, and she is an executive coach and a former psychotherapist, and she deals in conflict resolution. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Robin.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking to Mary. I'm going to have a conversation with my bud Mary because she is something else, and I have used her services myself. So by way of introduction, Mary, I'm going to say this, that when I was growing up, all they said is when you get in a party, if you get together with a group, don't discuss politics, don't discuss religion, and for Lord's sake, don't discuss money. And I have always used that in my head. I've always said, okay, I won't do that. I won't bring up anything controversial. I'm not going to say anything. And sort of tied myself up into knots before I ever entered the party or the gathering, because I thought, okay, be careful of what you say. And now that we're in this new world, with internet and social media and everything, it seems like politics and religion are discussed all the time. But that money is still, hidden in the corner going, someone talk about me, please. Someone help me because I'm really struggling. And so I thought what we could do is like a 3-part thing where I'm first going to say to you, when people are, before they get married or their spouses or significant others or partners in an intimate relationship, living together and building a life together, the money seems to be a problem. And I know you have some expertise in people that deal with emotional responses to things and how they view themselves. And I'd love to hear from you. What is the first book you might offer for them to read? What are the first words of wisdom we can give to a couple who goes, I don't want to tell my wife that I want a $50,000 car, or I don't want to tell my husband that I just signed us up for a week spa vacation for $4,000 and he says we don't have money. How do we do this? How do we do those daily things with our spouse?
Well, first of all, the 3 things that you were talking about, politics and religion and money, they're loaded topics, right? So they're emotionally charged topics. And especially money is really, in some ways, it's so instinctual because it's all about survival. Whether we know it or not, we're having conversations about survival, right? So it brings up really old, instinctual, primitive feelings about things we're not even aware of, happening. And one of my favorite books that I've come across, I think that really guides us in knowing how to deal with what we would call, this is a difficult conversation, right? This is a difficult conversation. Sheila Heen and Douglas Stone wrote a book called Difficult Conversations some years ago. It's a great little book. And what they say is that in every difficult conversation, there are 3 parts. And I've used this when I do training or coaching or even working with myself to remember these 3 different parts. There's the message. So if you're going to talk to your spouse or partner or significant other, or anybody for that matter, about money, there's going to be the message. And, you have to be clear about what is it you're trying to say. I suppose some people do need help really clarifying what's the message? What is the content of what I'm trying to say, right? So that's number 1. Secondly, there are the inevitable feelings that arise when you are going to engage in a difficult conversation. It's just part and parcel. It happens all the time to every one of us, maybe to varying degrees, but we all get triggered. And the third one, and the most important piece, is the identity piece. So if I bring this up to my spouse, if I mention my interest in getting a fancy car, that's not what I would be bringing up, but whatever it is that we need to talk about, or simply having the conversation. I have worked, when I was in my private practice, I have worked with couples that were married for 20 years and never sat down and talked about money until one of them lost their job and the other one was ready to leave because they were just expecting that individual to go out and take care of everything. And I said, have you guys ever talked about the money issues, what's the expectations around who earns money? And they've been married 20 years and have never had that conversation. They were afraid. And so the first part is really, what do I need to be clear about? Secondly, everybody's going to have feelings. But thirdly, and the most important piece is, what does this say about me that I'm going to bring this up? Right? Am I an ungrateful spouse who's now needing to talk about money because I'm triggered and I need to have an understanding and agreement around how we deal with money? But if I bring it up, am I going to seem pushy or, so most of us don't know that what's operating is this unconscious part that's really running the show.
So would you think too, that from what you're saying, I'm getting that maybe you don't really understand how upset you might be with what they might think of you. So that might stop you from ever having a conversation. You're not even aware that you're stopping a conversation because of how it'll make you look. So you just never have the conversation, but you're not deeply aware of the fact that it's because you want it. You don't know how you're going to come off in this conversation. So that might be the thing that stops you first, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, I think it's key. Most of it is unconscious. That third part is unconscious. So unless we're aware that these three elements are playing into every difficult conversation, we might likely come up with a great message, and we might actually be able to navigate through difficult feelings. But if we're not sure that what's playing on in this unconscious level, we haven't done some self-examination around that part, we may never have the conversation.
So you can be aware that you're going to have feelings. You can be clear with your message. But if you're not comfortable with the way it comes off, it's basically how someone's going to perceive you once you bring this up.
Yeah.
Then you're going to go, oh, I'm not going to have the conversation.
You might not even know you're avoiding
And
it.
you're not knowing you're avoiding it.
It might be just your go-to, how many times do we hear people say, I don't like conflict, or I'm conflict avoidant, or he or she is conflict avoidant, or they are conflict avoidant, right? Yeah. Why? What is that rooted in? It's rooted in fear, is what it's rooted in.
It's rooted in fear.
And so if that's not examined, the likelihood that that's going to be successful conversation, not very good. The chances are not great.
Wow. And when I think about the conversations, when I know people that have never had the conversation, they say, oh, it's just not worth the hassle, or I'll just take care of myself, or I'll tell them later. We'll approach it later when there's a better time.
Yeah.
And quite possibly, if you take those three elements, there might not ever come a time when someone's actually willing to have the conversation, even if they know their message is correct and they're willing to take the feelings.
Yeah.
The conversation doesn't happen. And it's from that one they're not aware of how they'll be perceived once they bring up the conversation. Wow.
Or honestly, they may not place a value. I mean, that's another thing that we're talking about a difficult conversation, right? Some people might not place a value on having a communication that would be skillfully guided. Right? Some people just get naturally very defensive and angry because things aren't going their way. So their first thing to examine is, how are your communication skills?
Yeah.
Do you place a value on communicating skillfully with your partner? Is that important to creating harmony and connection in your relationship? Because ultimately, what are you trying to achieve? I would imagine that you want to have a conversation that's difficult about money so that you're all on the same page, you have an understanding and agreement, and it just leads to greater harmony and relationship success.
Right. If you were to put on your coaching cap for a couple before they were getting married, before they were going to live together, would this be an important thing to know as you're forming this life together, as opposed to trying to come up with it 20 years later or 10 years later? This might be something that should be part of a pre-get-together situation.
Absolutely. And in fact, what just popped into my mind is a book that I recommended to the couples I've worked with over the years. It's called 8 Dates. And I don't know the author's name. I'd have to look it up. But it is about the 8 dates you should have, the 8 important conversations you should have if you're in a relationship that's moving towards commitment and you need to test the waters on these really important conversations. One of them is money. Mm-hmm. So one of those 8 dates, this author suggests that you make a date as a couple to make sure you understand what you're going to do when it comes to dealing with money before you commit to the relationship. Of course, that doesn't happen. Many people are married for 20 years before they even have the courage to talk about it.
And which is so intriguing, because the people that watch my channel and the people that read my book know I'm an advocate for these conversations happening sooner rather than later, that you don't tell someone after you marry them, I have $200,000 in student debt, I have $40,000 in credit card debt, and I think I'm going to be laid off.
Right.
Those kind of conversations that encourage people to hide because they're so painful.
Yeah.
I want those conversations to happen prior to a committed relationship, so that you go in with your eyes wide open. And if there is a book about the 8 dates, and then there's another book about difficult communications, those two things look like they are spot on.
Yeah.
For
must read
and must do's.
must read, must do.
Some things prior to making the commitment to a relationship, prior to getting married, all of those things.
Yeah.
Because we're now going to talk about in the next segment about how do we talk to our children when we finally talk to each other and decide we don't have anything. How do we tell the kids, oh, by the way, your
Right.
dad and I just talked about it and we don't have money. So I think that's a perfect, wonderful segment that you've just given people who are about to get married, who are married, who are not having these discussions. I think that's amazing. And I love those two books. I'm glad that you're recommending them. And I think that they're vital
Yeah.
for a happy relationship. You do not want to marry someone. What if you even have different spending styles? And
Sure.
one person puts every penny away and the other person goes, what? You bought a $140 purse?
Yes.
Even though a $140 purse could last for 10 years and you love it,
Yeah.
they will look at the immediate expenditure and like go crazy over it. And because they put every dime away and they're wearing shoes from 5 years ago, because that's how they view money.
Yeah.
So that is the thing about adults. They need to understand how they both view money and its value before they hitch up their get along with each other, before
Yeah.
they do that. Because then used to be more people divorced over, it was religion, politics, and sex. But now it turns out that money is the number one killer of a relationship.
It's one of the main reasons couples go into therapy is over money conflict. And I will say, just to finish this off here, when I was married, I've been divorced now many years, my ex-husband and I went to talk about money with a therapist because we were not handling it the same way. And she used a metaphor I have never forgotten, and I think people can relate to this idea, that she was using a gas gauge as an example. And that she said, Mary, you sound like you're really comfortable with always having at least a quarter of a tank. Right?
Okay.
And your husband doesn't mind going into the red zone.
It doesn't mind running on empty.
Well, it was really the red zone.
Red zone,
where
I see.
That was that day and age. There, in our car, there was a red zone.
Oh, I see.
I really got it. I thought, wow, that's, when you think about conflict, there's always at the heart of it, the needs are clashing. Somebody needs to have a quarter of a tank of gas. The other person needs to go into the red zone because they're better at taking risks, right? And so it's really also, how do you deal with conflict? And that's a whole other topic, because it has to do with our emotional schooling, the modeling we got for, conflict resolution. And I actually, in the book 8 Dates, one of the dates is going off and talking about how you deal with conflict. So they're two separate dates, so to speak, recommended by this author, but they're also very much entwined.
Right, because conflict is probably in every topic. We have the ability to cause conflict in almost any topic that we address.
Oh, as soon as two people get together, inevitably, when their needs come up and they are not in agreement, that potentially leads to conflict. The question is, how are you going to work with it when it happens?
Right. Okay, so that is the end of the first segment, and I think it was so valuable. And thank you for watching. And there's going to be a part 2, and it's going to be the conflict of money and your children, how to let them know that things aren't what they seem. So thank you very much. Subscribe, like, please watch the channel, and I'll see you soon.